Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Delgado's Workforce Development Tech Talk, Tech Collab podcast. I'm your host, Blair Dottin-Haley, and I'm excited to be joined today by a gentleman who has done some extraordinary work in our community and is working to help others do extraordinary work in our community. Please welcome Christopher Reade to the Tech Talk podcast. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Let's dive right in. You've done so much work in technology and software in the community. Take me back. How did you get involved in technology, in software?
I'll keep that short, but the shortest possible version I can give you of that is, as an early teen, I got interested in building a game, and I was lucky, very lucky.
Now, video game? Are we talking?
Yeah, video game.
Okay.
And the computers teacher in my high school was willing to help me and kind of guide me along that process. And in the process of trying to build that game over and over again as a teenager and into my early 20s, I learned how to become a software developer and how to build what nowadays you'd call digital products. So from that moment, I actually have degrees in English and history, not in computer science at all, actually, as a result, also, because I was already a programmer. And so in college, I audited operating system design, network systems, and stuff like that, things I wanted to know, and wanted the easy A for me in. But then I got a degree in English and a degree in history, so I could learn how to write primarily.
It's so interesting that you are not doing anything that you necessarily directly related to your school. There's so many people that I find who have degrees in a particular field of study, and the work that they're doing is not even in the same, even in the same, skip the ballpark.
I never expected to work in my degree area. That's not what I was trying to do. I needed two things. I needed the checkbox that said went to college, check. And I already was a technologist, so I didn't really feel like I needed to learn that. And so, but I did know that it was important to learn how to write and communicate effectively.
Yeah.
And so I was a little more deliberate than some people that are working outside of their field of study. But yeah, I'm definitely in that cohort of people who aren't doing anything close to what they did in college.
Yeah. So tell me about the work that you are doing in the community. And yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with tell us about LookFar.
Sure.
Carrollton Enterprise. You're doing so many things.
So when I moved to New Orleans in 1998, September of 98, there was no tech industry here to speak of. And then I moved away back to New York for a year. I'm from New York originally. And then I moved back here in 2000. And there still wasn't a tech industry here. And people used to look at me, or like if I'd mentioned like at a party or whatever that I'd moved my tech company from New York to New Orleans, people thought I was crazy. They'd look at me like I had two heads. Originally I thought of that as a opportunity. Because there wasn't a tech industry here to speak of. There was an opportunity to build one and to kind of lead one. And to a certain degree, I've done that. I've certainly been one of several people in town who've been kind of at it from the word go 20-something years ago. I would argue that the work I've done in LookFar and startups is only tangentially related to that. That's more to do with my love of startups and of my personal work in creating them myself. In Carrollton, it's Carrollton's enterprise software company. Enterprise software is not that different from regular software, except in scale. So instead of working on like an app or an e-commerce site for a business, you might be building, like we worked for 5 years on the United States Census for 2020. So you're working at a much larger scale, or like right now we have a project with a client out of Florida that basically processes all the credit reports, all the credit disputes for credit reports in the United States. So that's every single person in the country. So it's a same sort of programming. It's still software development. It's still the same software development life cycle. A lot of these same things apply, but when you work at scale, some of the realities change because you are dealing with, so like in this client in Florida, 200,000 requests a day or something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. In the census, you're dealing with 350 million people, right? So the level to which you have to think about how complex the software is significantly greater, simply because you're dealing with things that are bigger.
Yeah. What would you say, and I don't want you to give away information that you can't, but what would you say is the most fascinating project that you've worked on?
Oh, that's a good one. There's so many of them. Well, let's just take the census as an example. Great example here. And I think this may kind of give people a sense of like why enterprise IT can actually be really interesting. So the joke on that project, and we had a piece of that project. We were one of many vendors working on it. And but the joke on that project was that it's only 10 questions. Like the census is 10 questions. Right. So how hard can it really be?
How hard can it really be? But think
about this. I'll just give you an example. So my house, like many houses in New Orleans, has a carriage house behind it that we rent. Are those people in my household? Right. If my brother or my daughter goes to college, when she comes home for the summer, she live with us? Does she live away? How about the people who live on military bases in Afghanistan? Do they live in Afghanistan, or do they live where their base is? Where do they live?
Or do they live at their actual home, where their home is?
Exactly. But in a lot of military cases, their family may be with them. So if you're in Germany, right? Family's there. So where do you live? Right. So these are hard questions. You get race questions. So my friend, he's from Bangladesh, and his wife is from Texas. Their kids is fairly straightforward. They're half Bengali and half Caucasian American, right? If either of those girls marries a guy from, let's say, Trinidad, just something out of the butt, right? Trinidad, but is an American citizen. What are those kids, right? How are we going to classify them? So you start getting these crazy, complex, like edge cases that you would never think would ever happen, but in a population of 350 million people, everything.
You get
and everything. So it was fascinating in that project to think about that, and also its scale. So like we did this, so there was an online piece. So if you filled out your census in 2020 online, like on a website, you used our software. If a person came to your door, they had an iPad, right? Well, just think about this scale. We gave out 250,000 iPads to enumerators, right? In all 50 states and, however many territories there are, lots and lots of them. But anyway, anytime you give out 250,000 pieces of equipment that you're then going to track and get back, and you've got to deal with when they break or get stolen.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is, but it's fascinating because it's like, and the other thing I gained an appreciation for in that project is there are people in the federal government who care so much deeper than you would ever I mean, like, these guys so most people who work in the Census Department that we worked with are careerists. They went to
Right.
college for demography or geography or something along those lines. And they deliberately did that because they wanted to work in census tracking and all of that. These people are mission driven in a very significant way.
Mm-hmm.
And they were amazing to work with because stuff you have never even considered.
Right.
Like what matters, like, okay, we need to count these many people, blah, blah, blah. And this is how we've got to do it. Like these guys are really thinking through.
Yeah.
And
They're
they
in the weeds
know.
in a different way about
Oh,
it.
yeah, man. They
We
really
think
care
about
about it. And on top of that, they know in a way that's hard to really appreciate until you work around something like the census. They appreciate that the streets in front of their houses, the number of police in their community, and every other partially or fully federally funded item in their community has relation to the census.
Mm-hmm. That's
How
right.
accurate it is, and all of that,
Right.
all the money that comes from the feds goes through the census in some way.
The census.
And they're very, very, very deliberate about it, and they care a lot. So I gained, like I said, it was a miserable job in the sense of like you're talking about. You got hundreds of thousands of almost randos, working as enumerators. And it's everybody. It's like second careerists, it's college students, it's old
everybody.
people.
Well,
Everybody.
250,000. I imagine the range of people in
in every part of the country.
Yeah, everywhere. You have to go everywhere.
Literally, right?
So that's literally the whole point. Go all 50 states. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorite projects we've worked on because it had such meaning. And was also just, it was like an onion, man. Every time you thought you understood it, there was another layer behind it.
Yeah.
So it was cool. So I worked a lot of cool projects. I mean, I could go on for hours on cool projects.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, just the opportunity to work on something that we all are aware of and has an impact on all of us, right? Like you said, the money flows from the federal government through.
Well, or like we worked the Deepwater Horizon is another great. So in that program, so we gave out somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 billion to 500,000 people. As an IT person, the scariest part of that job and the most fascinating in some ways, I mean, we're collecting, if you're a chief security officer or something, the most terrifying documents to be responsible for.
I can imagine.
Deeds to people's houses, tax returns, driver's license, passports. I mean, you name the scary document you don't want to be responsible for it. And we literally had millions of them. And we never lost any of it. I mean, we deleted that program. I mean, this is the other thing that'll blow you away, right? That happened in 2012. I personally rolled out the last deletion in January of this year.
Wow. A decade later.
Yeah. So, I mean, these things go on for very long periods of time and long before everybody else has forgotten about them.
Right. It's still happening.
But that program also, it touched, I mean, literally, there was hardly a person I could meet. Right. It was always kind of I would always be when we worked that project, I was a little like touchy about it because that like either the person you're talking to or a person they know has a claim. And so it's always kind of touchy that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool project, though. I mean, talk about touching your community. I mean, all across the Gulf South, that program made a significant difference.
Yeah.
So that was cool, too. There's a lot of them. I worked a lot of great projects over my.
Oh, it sounds like it. I have one more question for you. New Orleans, you said you came back in the late 90s. It's undergoing lots of changes.
Yes.
In your opinion, what are some of the opportunities that exist for New Orleans socially, educationally, culturally that will help the community, New Orleans grow and thrive?
A couple of things. One, the macroeconomic push post-pandemic, the recognition that just-in-time global supply chains are probably not the best idea in the world, or at least not the way we've executed them for the last 30 years, will have a driver in the New Orleans economy. It will take a long time to see it, but it will make a difference because you're already seeing reshoring or onshoring, as people will call it, of certain types of activities and manufacturing and other things like that. So that's one driver that affects us because of our geographic position. The second major thing in that, and this is in our community, is a recognition that while tourism is great, it does not really have the resilience as an economic driver that we would like. And so you're seeing probably for the first time in my 20-something years in New Orleans, people actually taking effort and making strides to make different kinds of economic drivers work. The wind power initiatives, you're seeing stuff like that. Those I think are really great opportunities for hope, that things can be better in the future than they are today. Those I think are the big ones. I would say also the recognition that so goes New Orleans, so goes the state of Louisiana. There's been entirely too much us, them between New Orleans and the rest of the state. And I think the rest of the state has come to some kind of detente in their heads that we can, poo-poo New Orleans all we want, but at the end of the day, it's the driver of the state's economy, and your tax base comes with it. So I think there's some recognition of that, which I think in the long run will be very beneficial.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. One more thing before I let you go. Tell people how they can connect with you, connect with the work that you're doing for any of our folks who are watching.
LinkedIn's the easiest thing, as a way to just hunt somebody down, especially me. And so, yeah, that's probably the simplest way to do it. LookFar and Carrollton obviously have websites, but those are kind of front doorsy kind of things. LinkedIn's probably the easiest.
Perfect. Thank you so much, not only for the work that you have done and are doing in the community, in the country, but thank you for taking your time to join us on the Tech Collab podcast. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Blair. It was great talking to you.
All right, everybody. We will be back next time on the Delgado Tech Collab podcast. Make sure you check out Delgado's Workforce IT website at www.dcc.edu/go/IT to learn about all of the tech certification courses that Delgado has to offer. Until next time, I'm Blair Dottin-Haley. Thank you again, Christopher Reade, for joining me. See you all next time. Peace.
Thanks.